If that person shuts you down and puts you in a corner, there's one knock.
Humans inhabit space much more than before in closed spaces.
There is a huge difference in how comfortable people are coming in to seek help.
People today are very, very sensible. All clients come with Pinterest board.
When you say it's a therapy group, it's like
it's judgment. It's fear of judgment, I feel. Yeah. What I don't like, Nyari, is when people pick up an artist because it's an artist. I think nothing can be linear when human emotion is attached to it.
Yeah.
I know.
And I think that's what art does.
Welcome back to Behind Closed Doors, the podcast where we explore the unseen forces shaping our inner and outer worlds. In today's episode, we step into the realm where creativity meets catharsis, where architecture becomes a refuge, and where art is more than just an aesthetic experience, it's a lifeline. Mental health is often reduced to therapy and self care, but what about the environments we inhabit, the art we create, the performances that move us? From painting to performance, from design to dance, creativity has long been a way for humans to make sense of our emotions, to process pain, and to reconnect with ourselves. To explore this, we're joined by two incredible guests today. Firstly, Aditi Kaul, an esteemed art psychotherapist who has spent her career helping people externalize their emotions through creative expression. With extensive experience in art therapy, she surely understands how colors, textures, and forms can unlock suppressed feelings, offering a non-verbal path to our healing. Next, we have Shruti Choudhary, an architect and advocate for mindful design. She explores how the spaces we live in shape our mental health. She believes that architecture isn't just about function, it's also about feeling. And of course, our very own Naira Ali, consulting editor behind closed doors and a journalist with a wealth of experience in uncovering stories that matter. She'll help guide us through this rich conversation, giving us insight into the deeper layers of creativity and mental health. Together, we'll discuss how art and design influence our mental landscapes. Join us as we uncover the healing power of art, architecture, and immersive expression. Welcome to Behind Closed Doors.
Hi, guys. Welcome once again, Aditi, Shruti. So, Aditi, I'm going to begin with you. So, in your experience, how does engaging with art, whether it's, creating art or observing art, serve as a form of therapy?
So essentially, in my experience, which has essentially been using different art forms, everything from movement, writing, storytelling, visual art, in therapeutic practice. And the age range has been, the youngest person I've worked with is 4, the oldest is 85. So really there's a whole diverse spectrum of spaces when you look at mental health where art comes in. But if you look at the core function of it, I think it's centered in creativity. That how do you look at bringing people into a space which is creative, which is a form of expression, which is not necessarily something everyone engages in on a regular. Very often, we lose touch with it. It's sort of like schools, right? You start off with art classes and all of that for the younger kids. And then as you grow older, for some reason, it becomes extracurricular and it's not part of your everyday. And I think that's what happens to adults. We stop moving freely. We stop engaging in the arts as something that's part of our everyday form of expression. So we've shut down many ways in which we communicate, both with ourselves and with other people. And so one is creativity is sort of the building block. The second step is looking at expression. Then we look at regulation. So looking at whether it's emotional regulation, processing, trauma, for example, is a very non-verbal experience which impacts us at various levels, including the somatic. And to be able to process that just talking isn't enough because you're not tapping into where it impacted you. So it's very, very vast, from expression to processing to externalizing, being able to actually transform the art media. And maybe later I can share examples. Is something very unique to art processes, something you can't necessarily do with, I feel like sometimes we talk and, then the words are just gone. But when you create something physically in form, even if it's a piece of movement, it's there and you work with it and you reflect on it and you look back at it and you sometimes have insights around things that you yourself didn't realize existed, in terms of what you were going through, whether it was office related stress or trauma in early childhood, or dealing with family, whatever that struggle might have been.
Okay. Shruti, since Aditi mentioned spaces, how do spaces impact us in terms of mental health? For instance, we often hear when you go to some home, you say, oh gosh, I'm getting such a good vibe, or the aura is really good. Do you think it's really psychological, or is there a design element which works towards creating these spaces that calm people?
Hi, Nyare. Hi, Aditi. Well, definitely, design has a very large part to play in maintaining a calmness when an aura is concerned, when you inhabit a space. In fact, there's a very famous quote, no? There's a crack in the darkness, that's how the light gets in. So, as simply put, any space that is well lit, well ventilated, people don't realize the importance of ventilation, the free flow of air, and the circulation of the air within the space due to the levels and the heights and the light coming in, which we call fenestrations, is what actually creates an ambience of well being in a space. So basically, your five senses, right? And these impact your five senses. Design has a direct influence, any space design, spatial design, has a direct impact on your sensory perceptions. So anything that promotes well-being, why is it that circles are seldom used in residences? Because there is no vanishing point. It makes a person uncomfortable when you're sitting in a room which has no end. So these kind of things, whereas in somebody who needs a certain amount of calmness, you create spaces which are more white, less clutter. So it depends, and I do think humans inhabit space much more than before in closed spaces, and they have a direct correlation with their mental well-being. That's why I always say architecture is an emotion. It's not only
So,
built space.
coming back to you, Aditi, I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Shruti. Why do we feel moved when we see a painting, or sometimes it evokes a sense of unease in us also, or sometimes it makes you very happy? What do you think is the psychological or emotional mind, mental state that is going on when we experience these kind of emotions?
So I think there's two things, right? One is that aesthetics. I mean, in general, looking at something pleasing or something that's away from the normative experience that we have is pleasing, and it makes us feel good. And that's also part of art therapy. That the fact that you just create, forget everything else, that you can color on a page or throw a paint, on a sheet of paper, just makes you feel good and positive. The other is projection. So when you read a piece of poetry or when you see a piece of art, and if something from your own life or your own self, your own history resonates with that piece, I think that's where the emotions kick in, because you're essentially, or not you, one is essentially projecting something from our own self or our own sense onto that piece. And that's why they say that, like, someone writes a piece of poetry or art is created, but when you see it or when you experience it, it's a completely different narrative that you will take away from it versus the artist who might have come, I don't know, decades before you.
Do you think art therapy can actually substitute talk therapy? Do you think sometimes, people are not able to express themselves verbally, but they are able to express their emotion through their drawings or through their paintings or through any of their creation? So, does that help you in actually treating, say, mental health disorders a lot better? For instance, I know with kids, small kids, when they're going through trauma, I think the therapist asks them to kind of draw and paint because they're too small to express themselves. So, does the same approach even apply to adults?
In fact, it works better with adults because adults are much more removed from the creative process than children are. Children, I think as adults, that's a big misconception that in art therapy, kids, it works with. And it does fantastically well, but that's also because as an adult generation or population, it's easier for us to make sense of that. That, oh, we'll send our kids for art therapy is perfect. But as an adult to walk in, there's a lot of resistance that we often face where it's like, but will you make me draw? Are you going to make me color? I can't paint. I don't draw well. So you'll have a lot of that coming in. But essentially, when you look at art therapy, it's not devoid of verbalization. So a lot of the principles are centered around psychoanalysis and looking at cognitive therapy. So every time you do create something, you will reflect on that. You will talk about it or write about it or engage in a process of moving through it. So it's not devoid of talk therapy. It's like, let's say, cognitive work or psychoanalysis. It's a separate school of thought that is centered in neuroscience, in psychology, and in art. So it's just a different lens of being able to approach mental health. Again, there is more evidence in some areas. So, for example, trauma across the board, children and adults, much more evidence when you look at art therapy versus, say, something like obsessive compulsive disorder, where you would typically go for a talk therapist or look at exposure therapy because there's a lot more evidence that that will work better than bringing symbolism or metaphor or art into the picture.
Shruti, I know you're very passionate about art and you have this amazing collection of art at your home. So, how has, art impacted your life? And you're someone who've also seen loss. So, did it help you in those tough moments of coping with, the trauma of losing a parent? Or, in what way has it impacted your life?
Well, I won't say art in particular. It's been a combination of a lot of visual medium and a lot of expression in terms of I write. And I have been an artist, as in I painted. I was one of the lucky ones who was encouraged to enter the art competition every year in school. For me,
Wow.
it was not an extracurricular because I had a wonderful artist mother who encouraged that. So I think somewhere it's part of my psyche that what Aditi is saying I completely resonate because anytime I use my hands, I still sketch my plans, my elevations, because I was the generation before AutoCAD. But I do think it calms. And when you certain pieces of art, it's all connected, right? If you're a creative person, it doesn't matter what form of creativity comes out of you, but we feel a lot more deeply because sometimes you resonate with a layer that is not visible to the other person in a work of art. It may be a happy, buoyant piece of art, but you resonate with a very different chord. And there's a sculpture I have by this artist called Gyana, and it's a mother and a child. It's a mother holding her child. And to anybody from the outside, it just looked like a piece of sculpture, but there's raw emotion in that. There's movement, there's emotion, and I think that is what talks to me. And where children and art is concerned, I have two sons. My younger one is a goalkeeper, and he doodles before his matches. He doesn't meditate, he doodles. So there's definitely, like what Aditi is saying, she's the expert, but I have seen like proof around me that these things really help. So where all this connected is when in 2021 I lost my mother to COVID. I was very lost, and my father gave me the opportunity to make a house for him in the mountains in her memory. So I was the architect of the home, and I think that was my therapy. That 18 months of creating that house, building it. And I was very lost before that. I'm not been a very lost person generally in life. I'm very focused, but I got somewhere down the you lose meaning when the person that you are the reason why you exist does not exist anymore, right? You lose meaning, and somewhere architecture taught me that therein lay my meaning. The meaning to my life was to create a space where my father can have a beautiful memory of my mother, right? So that in itself is a privilege seldom people get. So I think no matter how it ties in, if you really, really let it come into your life, any form of art, architecture, design, expression, pottery can be very, very immersive and liberate you on so many levels that you don't realize.
Can you give us examples of spaces that have been carefully and specifically designed to, have a positive impact on mental health in India, maybe public spaces that you can think of?
My favorite till this day is the Baha'i temple
Ah,
in
okay.
New Delhi. Very many people don't know that. But if you go there once in your lifetime, you must. you will understand what a meditative space is. There are no idols, there are no visual imagery. It's just a white space with light and curvilinear forms. It leaves you with such a sense of calm. Anywhere else, I think any other place of worship which is very well lit and has a vibration in it also gives you that, that feeling of calm. But the Baha'i temple always stays in my memory as the most calming space that I probably the Indian urban landscape has seen.
So, Aditi, I wanted to ask you from a psychotherapeutic perspective, why do creative activities help with emotional regulation and trauma processing?
Okay. So, there's a couple of steps, right? Essentially, when trauma impacts the brain or the person, it's not always something you can explain. Shruti, thank you for sharing. And you use the word making meaning. That it's it's very hard to explain in words what any kind of trauma, whether it's grief or loss, abuse or a car accident or whatever it is that you might have been through feels like, because words are not enough to describe the depth of what the mind, the body, the soul go through when something like that happens, right? It impacts you. Now there's enough science and evidence to also show what it does to your limbic system, what it does to your nervous system, and the impact it has. And our brains are amazing in a way where they can also shut it down. So usually when you're experiencing a trauma or right after, the brain shuts it down in a way where you can continue to function. But what happens is it's still impacted you. And what the arts allow us to do is usually our step one in trauma work is building safety or building safe anchors. So how do you anchor into what my resources are? There's this amazing family landscape or tree, or depending on what medium you're using, we use, where I remember a client working and creating it out of their, since you were talking about your mom's jewelry. And, everyone in that entire tree was represented through different pieces of that person's mom's jewelry, which was very important to her in building that anchoring, and also recognizing that because of the relationships mom built, her entire, the tree, the support system was very vast. But when I had that as a conversation, it was like, yeah, I have cousins and I have this. It hits very differently, who's bigger, who's closer, when it's put down in art, what music resonates. So there's a safety building element. Once we start feeling a little anchored, then comes this phase called remembering, which is where you allow the brain to make meaning or sense, or you build a narrative. There's a technique called graphic narratives in art therapy, which are very, very powerful, where you're able to do a segment which is creating some version of what it is that you went through, what was life like before, and then now where am I heading? What does it look like after? So it's making sequential sense of what we've experienced or what our lives look like, what they look like now. And then, in terms of moving forward, is really processing, shifting, looking at how to resource and really anchor into all of these pieces. And the arts allow us to do that at a level which is healing different parts of us, which is not just psychological, but somatic, emotional, and also recognizing somewhere that we will always carry the trauma with us. That this whole goal of, oh, get over it, it's like, have you ever been through it to know that it's not something you get over? So I think it's really amazing that it allows you to also integrate and hold on. I had a 10-year-old where we did grief work through a comic that this child created across, I think we did 5 chapters, and this all came from this person, and it was done using mixed media, and just the whole process of the protagonist going through this war that had to be fought at the end, and how the grief elements come into the pictures in the middle, and where this child decided that the cape that they had for support finally could be taken off, and now the protagonist didn't need the cape. And I think I worked with them for about 1.5 years. And at the end of that process, when we finished, he said, I think I was smaller when I came to you, but I understand now that, was this supposed to be me? So I said, I don't know. Was it you? And he said, yeah, I think in some ways I feel like it was. And I think this was dad. And, started putting some of these pieces together. And it was phenomenal to have someone come in at the age of 8 and at the age of 10 be able to
See,
make some of these as we
have
were
that insight.
closing therapy. Yeah.
But tell me, do different forms of art have different impact on our brains, mentally, physically, psychologically? How does it work? Say, if you compare theater, dance, art, do they all have different roles in aiding mental health?
Yes. So it's similar and different. So it also depends on the person. What is something that there's two pieces of it. One is we talk about why you use certain forms of media. So you'll use more structured forms. If someone's coming in a more anxious space, right? You won't suddenly be like, oh, here's pain, do whatever you feel like. They'll just won't touch it or do a piece of movement. You'll start off maybe with images that are stronger, maybe collaging something that feels safer. Then you go into more fluid media when you're looking at expression and the processing piece of it. When you look at movement, that targets the more somatic pieces of what someone has experienced. Typically works well with also trauma related to sexual abuse, violence, body. A lot of those pieces is where we do art and movement together. Um, Again, it also depends on the person. Music across the board, we look at healthcare traumas. Music works very well in hospitalization settings for particular illnesses. So there are common points where all the art forms meet, and then there are specific reasons why certain pieces have more evidence in certain kinds of, challenges or struggles. But it depends on a lot on the person.
So, as an art therapist, do you employ these different forms when you're treating a patient?
So you need to be trained in the different forms. So, for example, I've trained in visual art. I've had elements of music, not in core music therapy, and movement. So, movement and visual art are the two key areas I've trained in. Narrative therapy is what I had trained in previously when I was doing talk therapy. But that's a very powerful art-based, again, approach which gets infused into stories and looking at a more narration-based approach. If I had to, if I thought, let's say theater work would work better for someone, then I would refer out because that's another, that's a completely different ball game. So I think it's about what have you trained in, and yes, typically multimodal work has a better impact, not just using one particular art form because it doesn't require you to be proficient.
So, Shruti, urban loneliness is a very growing and real phenomenon in our lives now. What role can design actually play a role, when it comes to metros to kind of reduce that sense of loneliness and create a element of warmth and draw communities closer? Is that feasible?
There are interaction spaces always in urban design that are incorporated, but what should I say, the tapestry of our lives today is very different from what it was during the times of our parents, right? Their community was very important. You had joint family systems. I'm talking about the Indian
Yeah, yeah,
context in
right.
particular. So you had a very different kind of cultural identity growing up. But today, like my husband and me are empty nesters. We don't live with our in-laws or parents, right? So it's a very, and that's the condition of most families today. And people are choosing to lead a single life, not having kids. Everybody's choices are different. In such an urban landscape that we have today, where the society is concerned, it's a challenge to create spaces of congregation. However, what is happening is in commercial buildings that we design and we construct, we see that there is thought that has been taken into like a retail space or a co-working space or an office space where there are these breakout spaces for breathing spaces that are incorporated. The cubicles are being done away with. When I'm talking about offices, it's
Yeah, open
flexible.
offices. Yeah.
So what they're trying to do is also, it's the COVID impact that you're coming back to work after essentially work from home. So it's, I think we've fast gone beyond going back to the old ways where congregation and sense of community is concerned. It is a more online sense of community now. I think the sense of community has shifted beyond the built landscape. However, colleges, universities, where impact is still felt, where congregation spaces, workspaces, apartment spaces, I think today developers in India, especially southern part of India, are much more cognizant of the fact that these spaces have to be attended to in terms of design. which wasn't there earlier. That's a positive change I see.
Aditi, speaking about urban loneliness, does art therapy again is a kind of an individual attempt, right? It's like a one-on-one effort. So, do you recommend, say, group therapy if there are people who are lonely? They can be, living in a home surrounded by people and yet experience loneliness. So, how does art therapy help these people maybe integrate families, build communication? What role does art therapy play there? Have you had situations where you've had families, maybe dysfunctional families, not being able to communicate with each other? I just wanted to understand, how does it work?
So, yes, I mean, one is I wish there were more groups. They're not enough here. But the group
Okay.
format is fantastic. I mean,
Okay.
if we could do more small group work, if more people would sign up for that, that would be very, very powerful. I still think there's a sense of, I don't know what it is, maybe fear or, when you say it's a therapy group, it's like,
It's
if I'm doing,
judgment. It's fear
yeah,
of judgment, I feel. Yeah.
it's like I'd rather see you one on one. So it's though art therapy again, we do have training groups, and those become essentially when people finish our training programs. I've been running one for about 8 years now. It's in part therapeutic because you can't train someone without them experiencing the process, and it is phenomenally powerful. And the support systems that we're able to build within this group, and we've had people. The youngest has been 18, again, oldest was 60 years old, and the connections that we were able to build with people with completely different lives, and that seeing those support systems still last is very powerful. Families, again, very rarely will come in as a whole.
Yeah.
I trained in family therapy, and all of the things they teach you very beautifully in the books, it's like a whole family walking in that format is next to none. You usually get couples, you will get a dyad, you will get parents coming in for younger children and then kind of trying to slowly rope them in to be like, if only you would also join us, there would be a huge difference in this child's life. But yeah, it's very helpful because what happens with art and multiple is you get them to do stuff that together, right? So let's say I give you and your two kids a piece of art to do together. And say, okay, make a family symbol, right? Or I give a couple of giant chunk of clay and I say, now find and build a bridge to each other without talking. It sounds like a very silly sort of thing, but when you have two people doing it, suddenly you'll have one kind of taking over, right? Or being like, don't do that, do it like this, handing this over, fixing something. And within 30 minutes, you will get a sense of who this family is, who this couple is, and how they actually function. Versus it would probably classic marital therapy take me anywhere between 4 to 6 sessions to, you know, see how initially they'll present very nicely, then they'll talk over each other over time, and it'll change. But with art, it's almost like it's competitive, right? They'll just want to control it if there's that need, or want to let go, or be anxious about, oh, is this okay? One will ask me 20 questions while one will have just one, or not be bothered, or looking at the phone. So it's fantastic how process plays out in an art therapy session when you have more participants, and you also see the lens of their relationship very strongly, or their attachment histories come through.
So, when do you actually recommend a psychiatrist or medication? When does that stage come in, and how do you figure out that, okay, this person, therapy alone is not enough? This person needs medication or hospitalization in extreme cases. Maybe it's a bipolar disorder or it could be schizophrenia. Does art actually help you detect these, mental health disorders? Can you do it through art therapy? Or do you need to work closely
You're
with a
not
psychiatrist?
So it's both. I mean, if someone walks in with schizophrenia, you don't touch art in any case, right? If
Okay,
it's
got
that
it.
severe that admission is needed or medication, you'll see it, you'll hear it in, you know, auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations, potentially, disorganized speech. The symptoms, which is essentially what a psychologist will fundamentally be trained in to catch, will present very quickly for the more severe struggles, or the severe parts of the spectrum of different kinds of mental health struggles, which is where you'll make a referral. Otherwise, also, if someone's coming in, let's say, with clinical depression, which again will be visible through the art process or whatever it is you're doing, and it's essentially creating a problem in their everyday lives, right? It's issues with sleep, with work, with areas of interest that previously made them happy, shift in relationships, and their ability to live their life the way they want to has been impacted for a long period of time, consistently. So there are different diagnostic sort of elements there. That's when you'd refer. But it happens both ways. So very often we'll have, so I work in a team in Fortis Healthcare, which is, I've lost count of how many we are, but basically over 100 mental health professionals across the country. We have about 12 art therapists, we have psychoanalysts, psychiatrists. That is a privilege because then we can cross refer. So you'll have a psychiatrist being like, okay, I don't need to give medication. Why don't you go and, try therapy for 8 sessions or 3 months or whatever it is and see. And okay, for this person, I think art therapy will work, or, this person needs more cognitive work, and vice versa. I think there's testing available for that kind of stuff now. It's best to cross refer. And if someone doesn't need it, they don't need it. And,
You still encounter resistance. You still, in India, people still assume, despite the progress we made, that going to a mental health professional for help means, oh, I'm mad. You hear that a lot. I'm not mad. I'm okay. I don't need to go. So do you still find this a bit of an obstacle that you think we still need to overcome despite all the progress we've made? Because I seem to get it a lot. When you suggest it to someone, people get offended, and you actually are coming from a good space and you mean well.
Yes, but it is far better than it was. When I started 13 years ago to today, there is a huge difference in how comfortable people are coming in to seek help, and ask for it, and even know the different kinds of support that they need. The second piece of it is that there is still a challenge. I mean, I was at my kids' school sports day today, and even there you heard this like, oh, Gen Z is just everything. They go and they're like, we need therapy and we didn't
Yeah,
need this in
right.
our
Yeah.
generation. So that line of judgment is still very much there, even from my own generation, seemingly. But it has evolved significantly, and people are more open to it. Spaces. So we have doctors which are making more referrals. Medical doctors, like a gynae will refer someone for postpartum depression, or schools making sure children are getting the help they need. So there are a lot of positive shifts, which is nice to see. But yes, it's still there. So.
Shruti, speaking about design, I mean, you're an architect. So when you are designing homes, how involved are you when it comes to the selection of art? Do your clients turn to you because you also have a lot of personal interest in art? Do you work closely with them? Do you recommend artists? How does that whole process work? Or do you leave it completely to your clients to recommend the kind of art they want?
So because I also I would say my day job is in the construction company, the listed construction company where I handle projects. It gives me the leeway to take on the projects I want in the architecture part,
Okay.
right?
Right.
So the homes that I've been involved with, they've always had art curation involved also. So what happens is, I do believe a home doesn't start from scratch. A home is something that a person has lived in all the years that they've existed. So they carry forward a lot of memories, a lot of pieces, things that they're attached to. And my team and me are not those kind of architects that say, hey, no, we ain't having any of that. It has to be our vision, because I think a home is yours. It has to reflect you. And what we have done is repurposed a lot of the things they've carried. Like we've had grandmother's jewelry framed. We've had, a sari used as a tapestry on a wall. We've used old shawls where we've repurposed the shawls and used as throws. That's the unconventional, the part of the art. The physical, in terms of what art actually means, I have a degree in art. I did my minor in art when I had studied architecture in the US. And the art that I studied was visual art. So what happens is that, yes, I have a natural affinity because of the family that I grew up in. But everybody's sense of what art should be is very different from what mine is, right? So basically, once you build the house, it gives you an advantage. I do think if an architect has that sensibility of curating art, it is a bigger advantage for the client, because the architect is also creating your space. So they have a better insight into your likes, dislikes, sensibilities than somebody you get to curate your art later. That's what I'm trying to say. So yes, it does, and I have been very, very fortunate to always help curate the art. It's been lovely because everybody is it's so different, it's so personal. What they see and what you see are two very different things, and sometimes as the same artist, two different clients, they see two completely different things, which is what makes it very exciting for me. And yeah, so other than the specifications of the marble or the wash basin or the light, which very much my team looks after, what I really, really enjoy doing, I thrive in it, is the art.
When it comes to art and design, how important is it to get the correlation right? Because sometimes you can have a beautiful home, and you may have, like, I know people who select paintings to match the color of their walls, or to match their upholstery. Do you get those kind of clients, or do people who obviously operate from a level of ignorance, for lack of a better word, but don't realize what it is? So how do you navigate those kind of tricky areas?
So I told you I only work with probably the ones I select to
Yeah,
work
yeah.
with. So that gives me that advantage because in my youth I've done what you're saying and it didn't resonate with me very well. But what happens is you still face those challenges. You still do, even if you choose to work with certain people.
Yeah.
And how I've navigated it is very simply, I always tie it to the mood, the vision board of the project, right? The
Okay, right.
concept of the project. But there have been, you can't put, like in a minimalistic house, you can't put a Tanjore painting unless it's tied in your decor somehow, right? It's as simply as that. But if it is a minimalist modern house with an Indian feel to it, you can add a Tanjore painting. So that I think people today are very, very sensible. All clients come with Pinterest boards, even for art. I think they tell you the concept before you know that concept. So yeah, but it is sometimes very difficult to navigate. I will not lie to you. Even it has been, and then in the end, you have to reconcile as a designer that it's their house, it's their home. So if they are comfortable seeing that piece every day. What I don't like, Nyari, is when people pick up an artist because it's an artist.
Hmm.
That I don't like. When I'm told, oh, it's Bose Krishnam Karamchari's work, or it's this person's work, Sunil Padwal's work. I'm like, but it doesn't resonate with your personality or your house's personality, home's personality. So that I think art should never be bought for the artist. It should be bought for what it brings to your life, because it's going to inhabit a home within your home, right? So that still I'm not very diplomatic in handling those situations when they arise. But yeah, that is the toughest part to navigate. That you have to resonate, not go for a brand.
Shruti, when we talk about art therapy, are there like stages that, a patient has to undergo before they actually reach, like you say in grief, there are 5 to 7 stages of grief. So are there stages like that in art therapy? I'm just trying to understand as a layperson. How does it work when somebody comes to you?
So it's, well, even the grief theory is being progressively debunked now
Yeah,
because it
actually
doesn't,
true.
you realize that a lot of, that it doesn't actually go like that and you kind of dance all over the place.
Yeah.
If only we
You
could
just
put
have to give
ourselves in
yourself
boxes.
time to come to terms with
Yeah,
whatever you're going through
yeah,
in life.
I think
yeah,
nothing can be linear when human emotion is attached to it.
Yeah, I
and
know.
I think
I'm
that's
going
what
through
art
it.
does. Exactly. That you can have. So the theory I like, I'll tell you, is something called the expressive therapies continuum, which is actually a more recent form, which
Okay.
what it does is it's art forward. It's art and neuroscience forward. So while all the theories of psychology still hold true, right? So if I'm doing grief work, I will have the lens of narrative work, or I will have the stages of grief floating around. I will not be like, oh, Abhi, you're in
Yes,
anger
yes,
and
yeah.
denial and so on and so forth.
It goes up and down
But
the graph, actually. Yeah.
it's, yeah. But the ETC is a model which was developed, which is very interesting, which talks about how all of us, and it's, you're talking about circles where Shruti mentioned. It's very interesting that we're not boxes, or we're not linear. So we have different parts of us. So each person has somatic, kinesthetic, emotional, affective, cognitive, different parts to us. And what the ETC does is it looks at how, when you enter into art therapy, you enter where the person is. So you'll have someone who is more anxious, more cognitive when they come in. So you won't start them off free flow, like I said, with, a giant jar of paint and say, whatever you feel like, and, put on some flowy music, because that will create more anxiety. This is a person who is likes control, likes structure. So you start off with something that's comfortable for them, everything from mediums to the amount of options you will give in that room, versus, let's say, someone who comes in who enters in a more affective space, right? They immediately come in, they're full of emotion, they're talking, they maybe start to emote or cry or feel. There you will enter, it's a, when you see the graphs as a top down and a bottom up approach, there you enter with them there. So there's no standard format which says, acha, every art therapist will start when you come in with these materials exactly for this time. You get to know who this person is, like Shruti said, for the house. It's beautiful, right? Like, is that sari resonating with me on the wall, or my, grandmother's jewelry, or what works for me? Or am I the person who walks in and says, one, two, three, four brands and put them, doesn't matter what else you do to my house, ye to meko dikhana hai. And I'll work very differently with the mujhe ye dikhana hai person, because their psyche comes from a different place versus the person who's putting their grandmother's sari on the wall, right? This person's entered more affectively. I'll need to take them up the spectrum to help them process, make more meaning, problem solve, perhaps hold their emotions better if they're spilling, versus another client who's coming in very structured, very much about presentation or how the world sees me, feeling judged constantly, feeling this need to show, and then therefore the goals with that person and what they will look like. So for anyone starting out, this is a really good model to look at, and it's got its base in a lot of neuroscience work. So it also tells you which part of the brain is impacted when you're looking at using which mediums, which is also a very helpful thing to have when you're working with a client population.
I've also wondered whether, like the Prime Minister always talks about how, introducing yoga at the school level is very important. And I totally agree, because that's another great way of, getting rid of stress and any kind of negative emotion. Do you think we have reached a stage where maybe mental health should also be introduced as a subject at the school level? Given the fact that everybody goes through some kind of a, emotional, mental, physical crisis in their lives. And if children are taught from a young age, if they're equipped to deal with challenges better, because you hear more of suicides amongst the younger generation today more than before. So I'm just asking you, would that benefit society as a whole?
I think there needs to be a systemic overhaul in how mental health is brought into schooling systems. So I don't think it can be a subject. We don't have a mental health class, but I think it needs, the teachers need to be trained. They're the first responders, your class teacher, when something happens and you go to ma'am crying, that person needs to know how to handle your emotions. If that person shuts you down and puts you in a corner, there's one knock, right? If every emotion is babysat constantly and it's very like, oh, don't say anything to the children, no rules, no structure, that's another knock on them being able to deal with life. So I think who needs to be trained is the teaching staff. And I know it feels like a burden because their priority is finish, one, two, three, four things on your agenda. But if that happens, if the system is trained on how to deal with or help children deal with or cope with their emotions. And yes, we can have life skills classes. I think we need to have a lot more play in learning. Everything, whether it's yoga, whether it's sport, whether it's art, it needs to be integrated into their subject forms instead of, okay, mathematics is different and football is different. But, if I can keep a count or track of when I'm playing football or how many goals are scored, and we do the maths around the board and we actually plan a game, your class is done. But I think it's a very hard ask of a schooling system that is fairly, rigid and ingrained. It's evolving, but I think that would have a much larger impact than introducing, let's say, a mental health class.
Great. Thank you, guys. I think it's gone on very well, and I really appreciate the fact that Shruti and Aditi have taken time out from their busy schedules. Over to you, Ananya. Do you have any questions that you'd like to address them?
No questions at the moment. I feel like you guys had very, very insightful, and it was very interesting to hear, different points of view from, an art therapist and also a person who creates homes. And I mean, there's a lot of talk about art therapy, but people don't really talk about how important it is to integrate wellness into your homes. A lot of people think that in a day where mental health is taken just, people say I'm taking a mental health day. They go to, they go to the spa, they get a foot massage, they do a face mask, and they think, oh my God, I'm fit. But they don't realize that if their environment, the way their environment interacts with them also affects their mental health. It's not just about going for one art therapy session. It's not about going for, taking one day off. It's about taking steps in your everyday life to alleviate, your stress and anxiety, and to basically have healthy mental health, if that makes sense. But yeah, this was very, very insightful. I really enjoyed how the both of you, complemented to each other's conversations. I mean, if we can help even one person out there understand how they can take care of themselves in a creative way, it'll be really great. Thank you very, very much.
Guys, thank you so much. Thank you once
Thank
again.
you.
Thank
It was a
Have a
you.
good
pleasure.
day.
Thank you
Have a
so
good
much.
day.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Bye.